I'm here.
I could call to order Kathleen Allen,
Here.
Tom Chapa,
Here.
Heather Del Conte,
Here.
Pamela Dowd,
Here.
Lisa Glidden, James McKenzie,
Here. Hi.
Linda Serino, are you there, Linda?
I read lips. I think she said here.
Oh,
Here.
okay. And Zeta Olson, please.
Here.
At this time, I'll turn it over to the superintendent for the superintendent's report. Nope, I think I have Linda also,
Lisa, let's
or Lisa.
count her.
Thank you.
Good.
All right. Good afternoon, board. Great to see you all again this afternoon. I just wanted to provide some updates and some additional information and then some recommendations for tonight, or for this afternoon rather. So I think I'll start. Go ahead, Matt. You can turn to the next slide. I think I wanted to just start out by saying at our last meeting, we had some information that we provided to the community. And one of the things that I got some feedback about was during the presentation, I talked about possible musicals or productions. And just to clarify, my understanding is after the meeting, what I didn't know was that there were some things in the works to do some virtual kinds of musicals and things for kids. And so I don't want anybody to think of closing the door on anything. Certainly, we all options are still on the table for kids. I just didn't recognize at the time that was already occurring. So my apologies. I wanted to share that so that everybody would hear that today. I also want to let folks know, we've heard from other folks in terms of the arts, theater, and marching band. So we've not forgotten about any of these areas. All of these areas are important to us. We're at this time, we're trying to really focus on reopening our schools and doing that in a very safe way. So a lot of things that people might be interested in doing, we may not be able to do right now. However, there are still some things that may come in the future as we start to reopen more one piece at a time. So time is truly of the essence with athletics. And let me just go back. I know some people have talked a little bit about marching band. So we know that the marching band season has been canceled and there is no competition at this time. Our athletics, we do know that season has not been canceled by Section 3. And time is really of the essence with that piece. So I'm going to kind of move those other pieces aside right now so we can really focus on the athletics. One of the things that I'd like to share is that, as we move forward again, we'll look at the other areas, but with respect to fall athletics, we know from our last time that a couple of things can be offered: tennis, golf, cross country. The swimming has been moved, and also what's offered now is soccer. A series of health precautions were discussed at our last meeting. I talked a lot about the New York State Department of Health and also Section 3's regulations and guidance was presented. We talked about equity concerns and then also cost approximations were also shared at the last board meeting. Go ahead, Matt. So since we last met, a transportation survey was launched. I got the results just late this afternoon. We had 143 respondents. We were looking for at least 180, if you remember, to possibly participate in athletics. So we got at least 143 people who did respond, about 40 or so who did not. The registration portal was also opened, and additional information from the state was reported in the media. And particularly what we heard from the state is that the last couple of months of aid that was withheld at 20%, that is done. But right now, for at least September and October, the state was going to release and not allow, they weren't going to continue the 20%, at least for those 2 months. In November, they were going to revisit and come back to revisit that 20% withholding. My understanding is that possibly they're waiting on to see what happens with the election. But at least for districts, there's some reprieve, at least with respect to the 20%. Also, another piece that we've learned is that there was a pretty big lawsuit that was placed against the state by NYSET around funding for schools, particularly because many districts started to really lay off because of the 20%. In fact, in the Albany area, in Schenectady schools, and the Albany City schools, there are over 300 people. I know in the Rochester area, just a couple of days ago, there were 220 layoffs. So there's multiple layoffs that are occurring at this point in time across the state. So as a result, the governor said, we're going to hold off right now for this month in October, but we're going to revisit this again in November. So we'll see where that goes. Okay, go ahead, Matt. We wanted you to also know that in terms of our survey, here's what we learned. We asked people if you needed transportation to let us know. And these are the results that we see as of now, right? So in girls modified soccer, we have 3 that wanted transportation or needed it. Boys modified soccer, 3. JV soccer for boys, 4. For girls, 2. Modified boys cross country, 1 child said I needed transportation. For girls, 2. For varsity boys cross country, 3, varsity girls cross country, 1, and varsity boys golf, none, as well as varsity girls tennis. So the total number of students right now, 19 students out of 143 said, hey, I would need transportation if we're doing this. So again, if you'll go back, we talked about 184 students who were projected to participate in our sports at this time. So we have about 40 or so, 41 that did not participate in the survey. One of the limits to the survey is that we launched it right after that board meeting, so we didn't have a lot of time, but we did get, I think, a good snapshot to see at least how many might be interested in transportation. Okay, go right ahead, Matt. All right, so I just want to go over again some of the cost information implications. Go ahead. And this is the chart that we placed up the other night. So certainly, you know, in terms of transportation, there will be some reductions in costs around transportation, but this is the chart that we put up. And at the time when we met, we shared that if we were to do all of the different athletic areas, that the cost would be around an additional $149,000. So again, a lot of the transportation would not be needed as much as we thought. At this time, again, we have another 40 or so students that we don't know what they need, but roughly 20 kids would need transportation at this time. Okay, go ahead, Matt. So in thinking about tonight's meeting, I wanted to share with the board that we were thinking through if there were other options available that might meet our needs, what would those options be? And as an administrative team, we talked together, and I wanted to share that with the board. So, you know, there are 3 options that we thought of. The first was the option that we talked about the other night. And you knew what the additional cost was with that. So with respect to information around that first option, you know, we knew that there was going to be some increased costs. With respect to health and safety, there are some risks that were involved, as we discussed that at great length the other night. With respect to equity, you know, by providing transportation, we knew that we'd be able to provide more opportunity and access for all kids. And then with transportation, again, we talked about providing transportation for kids to practices and also to events. Now, so that would be the first option, the option we talked about the other night. The second option that we talked about as an administrative team that I'd like to share with the board has a lesser cost, and that cost would be about $87,000, and we'll go over in just a moment. But that option would be to really just go with having varsity sports this year. So, you know, one of the things that we've heard from the public is that, you know, there's concerns about kids getting recruited. Some of our kids have been playing for a long time and they would miss the opportunity over, you know, after having played, you know, and this is now their senior year or so. And so we looked at this as an option, right? Why would we do that? Well, one of the main things that we're concerned about is manageability, but also health and safety. So what this option does is certainly it does bring down the cost. Second of all, it does reduce the amount of health concerns. You know, trying to take on all of these sports at one time as opposed to one area that we try to concentrate on might be, we feel it would be a little bit more manageable for the district in terms of staffing it, but also making sure that we can keep up with all of those numerous regulations that we talked about the other night. Also, it would allow at least students at the varsity level to have the opportunities to participate. And in terms of transportation, you know, we could still provide transportation, but the cost would be less. The overall piece with option 2 is that it's a lot more manageable for us as a district, and it still allows some opportunity for some of our kids to be able to participate in athletics. The third option is, in our minds, just to provide no athletics at all. So, that's where we were, option 1, option 2, option 3, as of really yesterday as we started to think about our last meeting. Go ahead, Matt. So in terms of cost considerations, if we were to do these, these options, so the first piece here, if we just went with varsity for girls and boys, so for soccer, you can see the cost, $24,000. Tennis, $24,000 as well, just over that amount. Boys golf would be $14,000. Cross country, $29,493. Now the transportation that we put there, because it was just, for varsity boys and girls, was around $7,000. But given the numbers that we have, that's for 2 buses. We believe that we can actually reduce that down, split that cost in half to just give us 1 bus. So you can take that cost down by another $3,500. And so the additional cost with just varsity boys and girls sports would be $87,699.
I'm sorry, the math is wrong. That amount is not 87699, it's 85899.
858. Nancy, do you want to?
When you add the 4 and then subtract the 7,000, it's 85899.
So Nancy's got a tabulation there. If we can just double check that, please, if we could. And I'm going to go on to the next part and come back to that. Would that be all right? All right, we want to make sure we're accurate with that. With the soccer piece, the girls, the junior varsity would be $21,383. Transportation to games included in terms of the games, what was included in our budget was about $5,200. And then the additional cost that we had was $16,183. With respect to modified boys and girls teams, for soccer, we had estimated $21,383. Cross country, $29,493. And then the transportation to the games included in the budget, we had $5,200. The additional cost due to COVID-19 would be $45,676. So you can see when you go across, per sport, the different amounts, which was for soccer, $67,000, tennis, $24,000 plus, golf for boys, $14,000, cross country at $58,986, and then the transportation with all of those, $17,400, which again would be reduced given what we just learned today from our transportation survey, which would bring us the cost of $149,000. Can we go back to that first one, please, with varsity, Nancy?
Yes, unfortunately, the slide got, the wrong slide was entered. The tennis is actually $24,686, which would make the total correct, or $26,486 for tennis, which would make the total $87,699.
Okay.
And Dr. Calvin, the $7,000 for the transportation, that is the amount that was included in the budget, so that would not be halved.
My apologies. Thank you.
No, that's okay. But if we were to go based on the survey results with 1 bus for all of those students, we could decrease the varsity budget by $42,000 if we only went with 1 bus to pick up students for practice.
Everybody understand that? We all okay?
Because we wouldn't need a bus for golf, we wouldn't need a bus for tennis, and we wouldn't be doing modified, and we just would have a bus for varsity sports for those few children that need transportation.
Everybody
Can I clarify real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
If I remember correctly, in the budget, it was talked about different sports because they need to go to different places, may need their own bus routes. So we were thinking about hitting the 4 quadrants for each sport. Are we talking about 1 bus for each sport, hitting every quadrant? Or are we, yes.
For varsity, yes.
Okay, so each sport, and so the timing of a bus to get around our entire district to meet a 3:30-ish start time is doable?
It is, if we know who those students are and where they're located. If they are at the 4 different quadrants of our district, that may be more difficult. In addition to if they have the same practice times. We don't have that information yet, so we're just doing our best to give you the information as we have it.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. It's just as I'm trying to imagine, because you said you had to really disinfect, because you had staggered releases and all the elementaries are being let out. Those buses have to go through a process, and then you have to not go to a bus do a quadrant, you have a bus do the entire district. That's how I was imagining the math. Thank you.
Right.
But if there really is only 3 kids, right? Can't you take something much smaller than a bus?
We have smaller vehicles, but they are not really roadworthy.
Okay.
Well, and you have to social distance. So you can't have 3 kids within a certain distance of each other.
You have to socially distance.
Yeah, the social distance apart.
I get that, but we have smaller buses. We have like the small bus where you could easily socially distance, right? 3 kids. You wouldn't have to have the big buses.
That's true, but we always plan for the worst case scenario if someone's parent can't take them that day and they call up and say, I need a ride, so.
So could
Okay.
we take a smaller bus? Yes, we could. That is certainly possible, right? Which might bring us some additional reductions in some of the costs, right? So, here's the thing. I think the point we want to share is that the cost could go down significantly and some well, now because we know as of today what the transportation needs are, we expect a reduction in that price from the 149 from the other night. Okay. All right, at least by, again, about 40, we said 42,000. I want to make sure I got that number correctly. Am I correct, Nancy?
$42,000 would be a savings off of that. So it would be the $87,699 or minus $42,000. So a cost for the varsity boys and girls would be $45,699 if that option was chosen.
Everybody okay with that? Are we good to move on?
I
Okay.
just have a question about the roadworthy. I mean, this is it's kind of on topic, but kind of off. The transportation, we add to our fleet every year. Didn't we add SUVs? And I mean, I know I've seen those SUVs, the Suburbans on the road.
We do have some Suburbans. I would have to check, Kathleen, because I cannot recall whether we added any Suburbans last year. I know that the 2 Suburbans that we have been repurposed, and we did cut some out of the budget and only ordered 2 buses this year due to budget constraints. So I would have to go back and look, but the ones that we have are not really roadworthy, and because we use them a lot for the McKinney-Vento runs and we have a lot of mileage on them. And then, as Jim said, you cannot social distance on those in those Suburbans.
I'm sorry, can I just ask, I thought it's masks if you can't social distance if you can't social distance, you use the masks in the vehicles.
We do, but our regulations for transportation for bus drivers, they are being told that they still, even though they're masked, the students have to be 6 feet apart. So in a bus that seats 66 students, we're only putting 22 students on a bus and having them diagonal.
Copy, thank you. Thank you for clarification.
Great. Okay. Okay, go ahead, Matt, to the next slide. So where would this additional money come from? Whether it's the 40-some-odd thousand or whatever the amount is. So here's our thought. My thought would be that we could do a couple of things. First, if you wish to, we can always dip into reserves, which is something I would ask that we kind of really consider. We don't want to dip into the reserves quite a bit. Or the second is we have a budget. We don't know yet what's going to happen in terms of the budgeted amount that we have for the year in terms of sports. We hope that the pandemic gets cleared up pretty quickly. We don't know how that's going to go. But what we could do is just start by spending from that amount that we already have, look to see what's there once we kind of move forward through the year, and then reduce, if we have to, come back to the table and think about, do we still want to offer everything in the next portion of the year? Or do we want to kind of pull from some other area? We'll have a better chance to see how things have gone throughout the year if there's other areas to transfer from. But my thought is just take from the area that we originally budgeted for sports and see where that leads us and come back around the January time where we're thinking about, more on the swimming and the other things that would be offered around March. That would be my recommendation to the board. So we can, again, take it from reserves or kind of go from the current budget. We have over 700, we have quite a bit. The amount in the area for athletics, Nancy, I can't remember right now. I believe it was like almost 800,000, if I remember correctly, or more.
Yes.
Right. So we have money there set aside for athletics. My thought is just let's take it from that area from now, and if at all possible, and then see where things go with athletics. We don't know how things are going to develop as the year gets going. So that would be my thought, basically. Or the other option, if we don't do any sports, then it doesn't become an issue if we were to opt out of sports. Right? So certainly the board can think that through. Matt, the next slide. So, we have a couple options there. Do all of the sports, do just varsity, or do no sports. And I'm certainly remain open to other options, but my recommendation after having thought through all of this over the last couple of weeks, I'm recommending this evening to the board that we consider really just doing the varsity sports. I know that there's some of our older students who really want that last year of trying to participate in sports, and I agree. It's their last couple of years. If we could try to make it so that varsity sports could happen, I think that would be a good idea. The other thing for me, it certainly keeps the cost a little bit more manageable by just doing varsity, but also in terms of health and safety. So, you heard Dr. Morgan, we all know what's happening right now. This helps us by reducing some of the amount of safety concerns in terms of numbers of people that we try to manage. The district is just trying to open itself back up. And this would be a lot more manageable for us to handle and our staff to handle with all of the requirements, with the temperature checks and, the surveys that need to be done and the isolation of kids who may have issues. It just makes it a lot more manageable right now for us, and as the year goes along, we can add other sports once things turn around in terms of the pandemic. There is still equity that would exist for those at the varsity level. In terms of transportation, the transportation cost would be much less. And I think it's a smaller group of students to manage and support during this pandemic, and the risks are less than trying to do all of it at the same time. So if I were to have my recommendation, my thought is I'm recommending to the board to please consider doing this option as opposed to trying to do it all. I just think it's too much for us to manage well. I feel very confident that at this area we can do a much better job at maintaining the health and safety. I remain open to the board, however, with discussion. Okay, go ahead, Matt. So we had some questions that came to me and I wanted to make sure we answer those. Go ahead, Matt. First question was, how were each of the added expenses calculated? And Nancy, can you just kind of go down this list for me, if you would, please? The first one, it started out with transportation, and it talks about how transportation for away games was calculated using a senior driver rate multiplied by 3 hours. Want to just kind of go over each of those, please, for me?
Sure. So the first one is in terms of calculating what a bus trip would be. It would be taking the senior driver rate for a total of 3 hours for that game. And then we calculated that doing the farthest game, which was Cortland, I believe, to the closest game, which was Fulton, and we just took an average of those two games. So that's how we calculated that. I worked that out with Tom Gunn, and we reviewed that with Rhonda as well. For pickup for practices, each driver would have a 2-hour minimum trip at $300 for each trip. At the time that this was calculated, we were saying that there would be 2 buses for varsity, soccer and cross country, times 5 days per week, times 7 weeks for that season. And then I had included tennis and golf, each had 1 bus. Those have now changed based on the information that we received from the survey. Security was calculated at the hourly rate for the most senior person at their overtime rate, because that's what it would be, times 3 hours for that game, which would include some before and after time. There's also money included in there for OPD, because we would also need them to help us monitor crowd size if it were to become over 50 in the crowd. Screeners, we have a rate of $20 an hour in there. This has not been officially determined by personnel yet, but that was the rate that we used for an hourly rate for screeners. Cleaning equipment was based on an hour after each practice at a custodial rate in order to go through all of the equipment and have it sanitized and cleaned. And then for custodial services, for restrooms, bathrooms, anything like that, we were just using straight time. Signage is just an estimate. It's just a one-time expenditure unless we have to replace whatever we provide for signage in the close to the fields or in our buildings. Additional field markings will have to be redone continuously, because we will have to mark where visitors will have to be, and the spray paint that we're using for the fields does wash away, so that will have to be redone in order to mark off social distancing. The nurse was calculated at a rate of 1.5 time, 1.5 for overtime. This would be for home games, and if we have nursing staff available. I did put enough in there in the event that we would need 2. And hand washing stations, I did calculate 2 in the projections, and that it could be anywhere from $750 and up.
Okay, go ahead, Matt. The second question was asked was, are the restrooms at OMS track out of service, and why do we need hand washing stations for cross country? So we are a little bit uncertain at this point due to track construction at the middle school as to whether or not the bathrooms will be taken offline. With respect to hand washing stations, what we really had in mind was that those would be positions next to the porta johns for practices, and that one is needed for the cross country. Now, if you go through the regulations or the guide around hand washing, the protocols there, they do say that you do have to have a hand washing station in the area or around in that zone whenever you're doing athletics. Depending on, it doesn't matter which one it is, you have to have that running water around. So one of the things we're also trying to do is reduce the amount of times people will be going in and out of the buildings, because of all the touch points and all the folks touching and going in. We're concerned about the cost that would be incurred with more staffing having to go in and wipe down things back and forth. So we thought it'd be better to kind of put hand washing stations and porta potties kind of right out where the activities were, and then we could go in and do some sanitation a little bit quicker there, as opposed to having them go in and out of the buildings. On Fridays there's deep cleanings that are occurring in the buildings, and we're just trying to really limit that amount of access to the buildings. Okay. Then the next question, so do we still have the portable restrooms, and wouldn't that eliminate the need for one hand washing station? So we do have the portable restrooms, which will be used at Turrell Street if we have soccer games. Our restrooms are again under construction at Lighton, and then we would still need a hand washing station for practices at the high school and one at the middle school for the Benjamin Complex fields to be used for practice. We would need at least 2 hand washing stations as well. And then since they will be portable, they can be moved to wherever they are needed, by the way. Okay. Can we go back for a minute, Matt? All right. So I hope I answered those questions that were provided. All right. Okay, Matt. So again, as I said to the board, my recommendation is, if we're going to be doing athletics, I would really recommend, because of the manageability, that again, we really consider doing the varsity sports at this time, and then build from there. My concern is that this is a very busy year. We have a lot that we're trying to undertake. And what I don't want to do is overwhelm our staff, but also really put any of our students at risk. And I think it'd be easier and better for us, more manageable for us. I don't know about easier, I should change that. More manageable for the district if we really consider the varsity sports. That's my recommendation. Okay, Matt, other questions from the board?
I have a quick question.
Sure,
I know that in previous years, there's been recommendations to move students up onto varsity if there's a need. Would that still be part of what we do within the district?
Yes, I think you're talking about, is that called the Rhonda, I want to say it right now, is that the AAP process? I want to make sure I got the right term for it.
It's called APP, and that
Thank
is
you.
for an
APP.
exceptional athlete. It's the use of it is not to fill rosters or just to move kids. So they
Right.
have to meet a criteria of exceptional.
Right.
So just for clarification on that.
So would that opportunity still be available? Yes, Linda, right? If
Thank
students met that criteria. You're welcome. Other questions from the board?
Okay, I'd just like to make a point here. What we're going to do is if you have questions, go ahead and ask Dr. Mathis, but we'll wait for discussion till after we have a first and a second because his recommendation will stand as a resolution or as a motion. So right now, if you have any direct questions about just his presentation, we'll do that now, and then we will ask for a first and second on his recommendation.
I have one. I just, is it an interpretation? Because I looked in the NISFA guidelines and stuff, the screeners for visitors, like Oswego County is having, I saw it in the shopper today. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. They're having a drive-through. Got it, hold on. Job seekers and employer vendors to an outdoor job fair. And that's an outdoor job fair. This is the county. COVID-19 regulations will be followed throughout the event. All attendees will be required to wear a face mask at all times and use hand sanitizer upon sign-in. It will be a walk-through fair, foot traffic guides, to maintain traffic in one direction. So again, I am still questioning that we have to screen our visitors when we're at outdoor events.
Right. So I understand the question, Pam. Thank you very much. So I can't talk to what the county does, and county runs different from schools. School settings have different regulations than sometimes you would get in regular public settings. So as you go through the NISFA presentation I gave the last time, I actually gave the page numbers and where these things were found there. So they do have that information there around screening. Now it says that you can't force a person to participate in the screening process, and you can't force kids to do it, but that you should be doing those things. And honestly, I would be doing it even if it wasn't in there. I mean, we do it for all of our staff when they come in our buildings, all of our visitors. Why would we do the opposite for an athletic event, just because it's an athletic event?
Well, because it's outdoors and it's not inside a building and it can be socially distanced.
I hear you. I would honestly say, Pam, if you're asking me, two things. Number one, I'm just going through the regulations, which do indicate to us, and we've actually reached out to have clarification on a number of those items.
Okay.
What we've been told is that you really need to be having screening in place, temperature checks in place, masking in place. However, you need to also know you can't force people to do things like that, but you really should be trying to do it to the greatest extent possible, especially now when kids are in the area, right?
I'm just checking because the wording was if applicable.
Right.
And
it would be applicable for us. We could do it.
Copy. Thank you for that clarification also.
Yes. No problem.
Okay, so
I just got a question asked to me via my phone, and it said that they would like Rhonda to speak to her feelings on the recommendation as is.
So I think we'll do that under discussion as once we get into so we can all discuss it together, and we'll include Rhonda, if that's okay with you, Linda?
Sure.
Okay, so what we need now is a first and a second for this motion that's been brought to us by Dr. Calvin. And it doesn't mean you agree with it, it just means that we are opening it up for discussion.
I will make a motion for Dr. Kelvin's recommendation for varsity sports only.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Pam. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, now we can open up for discussion, and I believe the first thing on the discussion list is to have Rhonda weigh in on what she thinks about this recommendation.
It's a very tough recommendation to have, but I do believe that for the safety and to ensure that we can provide something for our student athletes, that I think Dr. Calvin's recommendation is something that is a viable option that we could definitely do safely.
Thank you. Okay, other thoughts about the resolution, potential things you'd like to see? You can offer amendments to the resolution or just discuss it as is.
My concern is soccer, because it truly is very similar to a contact sport. And I don't see how these children can play soccer and be safe.
So Linda, do you feel strongly enough about that to make it an amendment to this motion that we remove soccer from the varsity only motion? Or are you just putting it out there for food for thought?
Food for thought?
Okay, that's safer. Mathis?
So I can't put motions, but I would be in agreement with Linda. If we're going to do things, certainly I gave you a recommendation, but if the board would be willing to remove that piece, certainly that would also help to bring down some of the concern. Right?
Okay,
I
so
make a motion to amend it to remove soccer.
okay, we need a first and a second on the amendment. Well, actually, Linda is the first. That's her first, so we just need a second.
I can second that.
Thank
Can
you.
we just discuss this before we start making amendments? Because not everybody has discussed the original.
Well, we'll go back to it. So what we do is we'll just now discuss the amendment and then we'll vote on it and then we go back to the original. So
We might end up getting like 3 amendments.
we might, but
We just discuss it, and then we can make an amendment,
yeah. So going forward, we can do that. Unfortunately, we're already a first and second inside this amendment. So we need to discuss this amendment, take a vote, and we'll go back then and do it as you'd like to, Kathleen. So is there discussion on Linda's amendment to the motion?
Which is to take soccer off the board.
Yes.
I don't know how I'm not quite sure how we overjudge MISFA, who has said that this is one of the low contact sports. Now, I'm not saying that I agree that it's low. I totally think it's a mid-level, but I'm not sure how, I guess that's our ability. We have the right to do that as it's in our district, so.
Excuse me, Magic. NISBA
Yeah.
has not identified soccer as a low-level sport. It's actually identified as a mid-level sport, but they've included it in the sports that are allowed to be returned. So it's not a low-level sport. It's been included. Rhonda, I stand to be approved. Am I correct?
You are correct.
So low and mid-level, but
Correct. Yes.
soccer, but they call lacrosse, not a mid-level, but a high level, because they seem like semi-similar, but.
Yeah, Pam, there's been a lot of craziness. Like, why would this even be grouped in together? I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah,
But
so if I can pipe in here, it seems to me as a lot of these things, if you read them, especially over the iterations as they go, people have to make decisions. And sometimes it's a group of people and sometimes it's one person, but a lot of these decisions are the best choice. And it's somewhat arbitrary if you don't agree with it. And if you agree with it, you think, oh, that looks right. I know at least for NCAA, they started with soccer being mid and they moved it up to a high. I'm not sure if you ever heard about that one, Rhonda, but I believe I remember reading that NCAA reclassified that as a high. So even within one system, they change as things change in life. And I'll go back to kind of what Dr. Morgan said. My interpretation is that he did not believe it was safe. He did not believe people could be distanced in that sport. And having my children have played that sport as very young children, it's not a sport where you're going to get a ball away from somebody if you don't get close to them. It's the nature of the game. People taking headers, how much stuff comes off? You know, so I thought I'd just say it because the classification, we can agree of whether they're made properly or not. A lot of this stuff's arbitrary, and it does change.
So I also just tried to do some research to see how soccer was classified, and both as far as I could tell, I mean, the U.S. Olympic Soccer Committee and I can't remember now if it was the American Soccer League. So like for the Olympic one, they're saying that like even if you go now, like there's no contact training and no interaction with other teams. So that's, you know, for like the Pennsylvania Youth Soccer organization, and for the U.S. Soccer Association was basically here are things you can do on your own at home to keep fit and training while we're not having the training, you know, while we're not having our regular practices. So I would vote in support of this amendment to remove soccer and just move it to spring with the other higher risk sports.
So in terms of moving soccer to spring, that would have to be done by the Section 3 group to move it to spring. So if we just remove it from here, that just means we're not going to do it this fall. Basically.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Okay, all right.
Okay, are people ready to have a vote on this amendment? Just nod.
I have a quick question because I don't know how this is set up. If I remember reading correctly, within our own Section 3, the Frontier League, 12 of those schools all decided to say no fall sports at all.
Yes.
If they held soccer, could we theoretically compete against them in the spring? Can those kind of things be worked between leagues within the Section 3?
Rhonda, would it be all right, Heather, if Rhonda kind of talked a little bit to that? Be all right? Go ahead, Rhonda.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a discussion. So Fulton opted out and they're going to participate in fall 2. Syracuse City School, which is in our league, has also done that as well. And I think the next closest is Solve as well as the Frontier League.
Today.
So I was contacted today by them inquiring about creating a schedule because they knew we were on the fence about creating a schedule for what it would look like between all of the schools that I just mentioned of opting out and then choosing to do fall season 2, which would be all of these sports that we're talking about. So yes, we could create a viable schedule that would be competitive with those teams, those schools.
Are those schools located further away than our normal scheduled schools? Obviously not Fulton, but compared to like, you know, who we currently play, if they are off into the fall number 2 seasons, is our transportation cost going to be a little more because the schools are further away than what the regular season schools are?
We would only be traveling between Oswego County and one other county versus 4 that we travel to now. Because we go to Cortland, we go to Onondaga, we go to Cayuga for Auburn, and obviously Oswego. So I don't know the actual mileage, but I know countywide it's different. It's less.
Yep, thank you.
And Rhonda, what percentage of our conference is that? I mean, is it half or is it less than half?
Right now, in our league, it would be Syracuse City is in our league, Fulton is in our league, and we are in our league. So for us, that would be a third of us. But with Syracuse City being so big, we could create a viable schedule. And then we would reach out to a Solve and we would reach out to the Frontier League if they would want to participate, you know, once we know decisions and once we get closer to what goes on.
And this could be sport specific. Let's say we went ahead with varsity sports for everything but soccer. We could still do this with just soccer, or is this an all or nothing?
I believe it's an all or nothing from when I asked.
Okay, so as we're voting on soccer, recognize that we are voting in this case, in this motion, to eliminate just soccer. And there may or may not be a chance to rectify that sport this year. So that's the risk of this. Yep.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Is fall 2 the spring? Is that what we're talking about now? When is fall 2?
Good question. Rhonda?
Fall 2 would start in March. So what they would do is they would modify so that winter would go, and then you would see a fall 2 season, and then you would see a spring season.
So those other school districts that you mentioned that decided not to do any sports now are going to have a competitive season in the spring, they hope.
Correct, and that's why they're calling it a fall 2. They're just not in incremental order.
Okay.
And they're going to be playing in the snow, just for the record. Okay, so are we ready to take a vote? Because I'm sure we have a lot more to get to tonight, and we have not a lot of time. So, Karen, can you please call roll call vote? This is just for the amendment to remove soccer, varsity soccer, from the varsity recommendation.
You're on mute, Karen.
Kathleen Allen,
No.
Tom Chapa,
No.
Heather Del Conte,
No.
Pamela Dow,
No.
Lisa Glidden,
Yes.
James McKenzie,
No.
Linda Serena.
Yes.
So that
Okay.
would be 5-2.
Okay, so we're not now removing soccer at this point in time. We'd go back to the original resolution, which is varsity only. Is there more discussion to have before we take a roll call vote on that?
I would just like to point out that in the expenses, cross-country uses no equipment. There's a $500 cleaning equipment. The equipment is all the kids. What would we have to be cleaning?
Rhonda, can you talk about equipment that might be attached to cross-country?
There will be a little bit of equipment in regards to the chute. So if anybody touches the chute as they're coming through to the finish line, we would need to make sure about that gets cleaned. Any of the areas of where they're going to warm up and different things, if we do have to get them inside a space to be able to warm up efficiently, if it's starting to be a little bit of inclement weather, those kinds of things that we have to put into place.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other
So
questions?
I do have a couple comments. I'd first like to really thank Heather at the end of last meeting encouraged people to reach out to us. And people did, and I appreciate that because getting thoughts from multiple people, different perspectives, it really helped us to think. And I'm glad that everybody, and I'm also thankful to everybody here and the fact that you're willing to take more time to meet and think, because I've had a chance to think about this a lot. And we talked about the budget a lot, which I'm still concerned about. Even though the governor's ponying up a couple months worth, there's nothing about the $518,000 that he hasn't paid us yet. And $518,000 is a lot, especially when you look at, we've already taken out of reserve 800,000 plus to do the technology to get through COVID. To be frank with you, I voted no on that last vote because I didn't want soccer separated from all the rest. I think we should be moving lock, stock, and key, especially when interacting with our other Section 3 neighbors. I think if things are great in March, I think we really should give them an opportunity to do that in March. But I heed Dr. Morgan, I do believe that this is not a time that we should be forcing things through. And it does feel to me like we're really forcing an issue in a difficult time. for many, many reasons. I really took kind of what Zeta had said and other emails I heard with, people are resilient. People will adapt. Hey, they may surprise you because they'll do something else later. I'm glad we moved on from the meeting because it gave me a chance to think about those things. So I don't know how other people fail, and this may fail miserably, but I'd like to make a motion that we don't do any sports for this fall.
Okay, so to be clear, Jim is amending the varsity only to remove all of the sports. So I'm wondering if a cleaner way to do that is to vote on this one and then make your motion to, instead of going back to as it was described yesterday or Tuesday, we make that motion after the vote. Is that, or should we do that?
And that's where Kathleen was going to ask about process, and I think that, I agree, having an idea about exactly the formality of when to make amendments or not, because if this voted, then theoretically we have no sports, maybe, or do we actually have to vote to do nothing? That kind of, it's weird to me that we would vote to do nothing. So a lot of times when you do nothing, just nothing happens.
Right, right. This is a weird situation.
I'm just telling you my opinion, and I don't want to misconstrue that. It's not that I supported soccer necessarily. I think it's the most dangerous of all the sports. In fact, I'm not sure for cross country how we control how they control their courses. So we might be able to widen our cross country courses a bit, but we're not guaranteeing that everybody else is going to be doing the same thing. And I have concerns about cross country. If there was an amendment about cross country, I would have brought that up. But I only voted no because I didn't think soccer should be parsed out, because I really think all of them should try to do their best in March. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And honestly, I think your motion to amend would have made more sense if we were talking about all of the sports. So I think that's where I was getting confused. So why don't we, 3 options were given to us and they recommended this one. We'll fully discuss and vote on this one, and then we can go back to you making the motion to suggest that other option. Would that work for you?
Sure, and even if somebody else wants to make the motion, I'd be good with that too.
Okay. I'm so sorry I'm confusing everyone, but yeah, this is a very strange situation.
Yeah, just being new, I wanted to make sure that procedurally we didn't get ahead of ourselves in case people, had votes and how they wanted to do it. It's, like you said, it's a complicated thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that there are those other options still on the table should this vote not pass. So I appreciate that. Any other discussion on this particular recommendation that was given to us by Dr. Calvin?
Yeah, I'm going to speak to that, and then we can speak to the whole thing later. But my concern is with this whole process, we're trying to solve this, and we keep cutting it down to make it palatable for everyone. And in doing that, we talked about equity, and we were talking about equity within the athletic system, right? So having equity so everybody can participate, and we try to solve that. But then we might remove another sport, or we might do this. But what about the equity across everything, and for every other part of it? And I know Dr. Calvin referred to it earlier today, talking about the arts and talking about different areas. But I feel like we're taking this and trying to accomplish this, and we're really trying to work to solve this problem and not looking at the whole thing, which again will come back to education and the level of complexity. So in the solution that we've come to is, okay, we've made it less complicated in these complicated times, right, to try to take a little stress off the district, but at the same time we've winnowed it down to fewer and fewer people, that we're putting more money on. And I'm not talking about that, but I want to go to safety first. And with everything else that's going on around us, including the college reports that are happening there, what's happening in Baldwinsville, what's happening in other things, and see what's going to happen before we introduce another potential network for spreading COVID. So I just come back to that. So that's why I think I would vote against this, because I think we're, for 2 reasons. One, because we're still perpetuating the potential transmission, but also we're winnowing it down and becoming more exclusive in terms of who we're helping. So
I'd like to make a statement too before we get to any votes, and that is that, throughout this whole process, the Board of Education, we've all had the privilege of hearing from a number of our community members, our district employees, students have called me. And boy, is there a variety of opinions on whether we should go forth with fall sports. I'd like to remind everybody that, you know, the board in and of itself has listened to everybody. But we are representatives of the community, and our charge is to think about the health and well-being of our children, and also overseeing the financial security of the district always, but more so through this time in history. As I indicated during the last Board of Education meeting, it's not only sports, but it's all the extracurricular activities that our children have been affected by through this pandemic. And I think we should just put the brakes on and we should take our time, and my votes will be a no for sports for now, making sure that we're going cautiously, looking at March, and so that we're looking at all of the arts programs, the sports programs, and as you said, Tom, equity for all of our children.
And can I say one more thing? There's also we're looking this through the paradigm of the traditional, which is these teams did these. If we can engage, like right now, you're talking about a virtual musical potentially. During COVID, a lot of competitions and races have been turned into virtual races. You know, so people have gone out, and as far as cross country, they've been running, they've been accumulating miles. The Billy Goat, they turned virtual. So it's our charge, I think, you know, get the school open safely, and then think outside the box and how to engage these students using technology, using virtual and different approaches potentially that may not put the burden on us financially, but may put the burden on us creatively to try to figure different ways to engage. We've got the new field, and you can't put competition on it, but could we put, and I've talked to Jim earlier about this, could we put strength training and conditioning at socially distanced areas? Could we engage to use that as something to encourage and develop our athletes during this time, as opposed to saying, oh, we're not doing anything? But I mean, those are just thoughts I had relative to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Sorry. Okay. I've got a lot of things going through my head. I don't like it seems exclusive to me to just say varsity and not include a wider group of kids to have more opportunities for more kids. Again, you know, at the last meeting, I brought up marching band and, you know, that kind of stuff. I'd just like to see that. I guess what I keep thinking through on this is this is what the state has given us. This is what they said we could open. This is what they, you know, these are the sports that they said we could do. We've got to learn to live with this. This virus isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to be around. It's not going to magically disappear. And we've shut down life for months, and now we have to get into the mind frame of how do we live with this? Not how do we stop living and stay in our homes? How do we live with this and teach our kids to do things, wash their hands? You don't go somewhere if you have a fever. You don't. That's where I keep coming back to, because I am concerned, like I said, about the. I mean, CDC came out and said. Or CDC or the WHO, one of those two, you know, about the suicide rates being higher. And I'm really concerned for our students and that kind of, you know, and Zeta had even mentioned, you know, that at the last meeting where she said, you know, if you're in a bad place, call somebody, reach out to somebody. We have a huge contingency of kids in our district who home is not a safe place sometimes. And we took their safe place away when we are telling them to stay home now. And I'm really concerned about that. And I'd like to see not just varsity, I'd like to see modified as well. I'd like to see us move forward and teach our kids how to manage it. We need to learn how to manage it and how to live with it, because it's not going to go anywhere. I guess, and it just, I liken it to when our kids driving a car. What's the highest males between 18 and 25 have the most car accidents, whatever. But yet we still allow them to, because we've taught them to do things carefully and cautiously and safely. And that's where I'm coming from on this. I'm not trying to endanger anybody's lives. I'm not being selfish. I'm saying, let's manage this the right way, move forward, and start living our lives again in the correct manner.
So a lot of what everybody has said really resonates with me on both sides. Just one thing I'd like to say is I think when the state limited the numbers, we kind of took the social, emotional well-being of our kids kind of off the table, in addition to some of the equity issues, because cross country was usually a sport, modified cross country, you could have like 50 kids on the team. And it was a great place for those kids to fall. But that's been taken out of our hands already. No matter how we vote, that's been taken out of our hands. So I think we already have to be incredibly creative. I think you're right, Kathleen. We do need to learn how to live with this. I think varsity only is a good compromise because we can start out slow and figure it out with the older kids, and then use, but hopefully, like some of the things Tom's saying, to be able to brainstorm other ways we can reach out to the kids in a real equitable manner, and really kind of meet their emotional needs, their social emotional needs in other ways. And hopefully we learn from this in a way that we can then extend it as we go and broaden it as we go. But the state has unfortunately already taken numbers out of our hand, which stinks. But it is the nature of the beast right now too. So I'm actually in support of this. I think it's a great happy medium, and I think we'll learn a lot. And I do think we kind of owe it to our older kids to have a chance at it anyways. And I don't think transportation costs are going to be anywhere near what we've budgeted, because older kids drive themselves typically. Older kids can walk. Older kids can do a lot of things that the younger component cannot do. So I will actually be voting in favor of this.
I loved at the end of the last board meeting, our student representative made a statement that resonated with me over the past few days thinking about all this. And she said to all of us something similar to, our students are very resilient and they're capable of finding new hobbies and new ways. And families need to step up and to become active family members again and find ways to engage their children in healthy activities around the home and on the farms. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I thought she was eloquent at the end of the last meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's a happy medium. I think varsity only is a compromise that I could live with. I can support that. I'm with Kathleen. We have to live with this. We have protocols in place. Hand washing, masks, social distancing. We've all heard it for months now. Mathis has said, we're building the plane as we're flying the plane. We don't know what March is going to bring. We don't know what next week is going to bring. One foot in front of the other. We have the protocols. We have the abilities. I think we need to try. We need to let these kids have personal contact. Linda, I hear you. Families do need to get out together. But these kids, these student athletes, they need to be with their cohorts. You know, I love my daughter. She loves me. She doesn't want to be with me all the time. That's the nature of teenagers. I think that for all of their social, emotional well-being, we're watching their health and safety. We're teaching them masks, social distancing, wash your hands. We're bringing in what we need to keep them safe. If we don't start going forward, we're just stagnant. We're staying here. We're standing still. I can't support standing still. We have to take steps to move forward. I totally will be pushing for the arts to find ways. We have creative minds in this district. I'm an out of the box girl. I love out of the box. I don't like to do things the way it's always been done. Anybody that knows me knows that. I want to find a new way. Use our creative minds in the district for all the arts, for all the other things. But I think this is our opportunity to at least let this select group, yes, is it equitable to every student in the district? No, but every student in the district isn't stepping foot into school buildings either, so that's not equitable either. Sports equity, it's never there. If families can't pay for their kids to play youth sports, they haven't played right along. When they get into middle school, high school, if they haven't played soccer, lacrosse, basketball, volleyball, they generally come to running because that's not something that you have to have a lot of background on. Do they come to cross country? Probably not, because they don't like to run the distance. But the indoor track, the outdoor track, you'll see those numbers pick up. And those are kids that you get from, they weren't in the youth programs. So the inequity exists before they even come to us. But again, I think we have to move forward. We can't just stay in our homes. I'm with Kathleen, I'm with Heather. I will vote.
So if I can just say something, actually I have a question in here somewhere. Just gonna work on how to get there. I don't believe our planet will be rid of this particular virus anywhere in the near future, if ever. It's set up in the human population. I agree with that. But I also do know that our ability to medically deal with this novel disease is not where it needs to be. And they're working hard. The problem is it's not a quick process. And honestly, my background is medical research. I went to a medical school for my degree. This has been something I have looked at for a very long time. And I am not pessimistic. I am optimistic that this will at some point, with the proper treatments and vaccine, it'll go away. We're not going to have to set up to live like this. To say we need to move on, I agree at some point, but I'm not sure that the moment is now. So as I think about this, and think about the resiliency, I guess I mentioned earlier what Zeta had said, I do believe our students are resilient. I do believe they will figure out other things to do. And health and safety is something. From the first presentation that we had, and this is where I got to my question, Dr. Calvin and Rhonda, you had in the slide that cross country and soccer, health was a concern. Dr. Morgan said everything, in his opinion, was a concern. So again, I go back to why I didn't just lop soccer out, because if there are multiple concerns, it's soccer and cross country, because we can't control other people's courses. And now you're left with tennis and golf, and I feel really bad about tennis and golf, but the idea where Section 3 might be able to do something together en masse, that's appealing to me. That aspect of moving on and looking at how when vaccines may come out, and even if you need 2 doses a month apart, I'm going to go back. I am optimistic. I'm irritated that we haven't been able to get there quicker, but the irritation is irrational in my mind, and I try to tell myself, don't be irritated, because we want to move forward, right? But that's not the way this system works. You can't, the vaccines, the medicine, many people are not dying because we know not to put them on ventilators right away. We didn't know that January, February. And so my thought is if we do everything, do it at once so we can concentrate on that reopening. We can know what our financial situation is, and we can walk lockstep and say all our athletes are equal. No particular group is better. And yeah, we feel really bad for our seniors, but we feel bad for everybody. And I do. So I want to put that out there, because I do get we need to get out there. We need to learn to live with this, but I think we need to do it in a way that is a little slower than what this proposal is doing.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, is everybody feel confident enough that they at least have enough information?
Now, I just want to know, so Rhonda, they're saying, the NIFSA rules are saying not 12 students on the team, but 12 students would be able to travel, correct? Or go to a meet. Is that correct? You're on mute.
Okay, I couldn't get the screen thing to come up to unmute. So what it is that 12 student athletes for each school per boys and girls, like 12 boys, 12 girls, can be at the meet, because we also have to keep into consideration of the numbers. So even for an outdoor venue, it's considered a gathering. So we have to make sure that we only have 50 that are there. So with us having 12 for boys and girls varsity, another team doing that, you're looking at close to the 50, and you've got to have a trainer, supervisor. So you're getting close, and then, you know, they say 2 spectators per student athlete. We're kind of figuring out how that can actually happen with the teams, but that's why. So the other kids can't even really be there to, if they are just practice kids, they can't even be there to support their peers.
Right, I understand that. I guess I'm looking at these sports and, you know, like golf, boys golf, that's 12 kids, right? Around there, 12, 14 maybe.
12. I think it's 10, but I think that
10. Okay, tennis, same thing. It's usually it's not a very large group of students that are taken on the team. So that's my concern, is how many kids. I mean, if a lot of kids end up wanting to do cross country, if we move forward on this, can you stagger their practices so that, you know, you have the same pods of kids practicing, so that more kids would have the opportunity, so that you're not just taking 12 kids or 15 or whatever. Do you see what is that making sense, or am I not being clear?
it does. I think it comes down to daylight and supervision. So with only having a coach and an assistant coach, that would be really difficult, because they could potentially, with more kids, have like a 4-hour practice for the coach's part. Do you know what I mean? And the athletic trainer. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I'm looking at Sam's baseball team. The way they were doing it when they were allowed to have practices was, you know, it was always the outfield. It was those, you know, they had 6 kids. That was it. That was all that was in their group. And so those kids did their practice, and then pitchers, and then, you know, I mean, so you had those groups at different days practicing, so that everybody's still practicing, just not all at the same time, not all on the same day. So I'm just trying to think, how can we get more participation and have this really be, you know, just an opportunity for more kids? That's where I'm coming from.
So Rhonda, not to cut in on you, but I think the state has said 12 kids. So if we want to brainstorm how can we bring athletics to more people, I think that's probably for a different discussion and vote, because this is really on the competitive. This is about the competitive league play, correct? A varsity league play, and the state has said 12 people. Am I not right about that, Rhonda?
You're correct.
Right, for the meet, I'm wondering how many kids are going to be allowed to be on the team. That's what I'm asking.
Right, I'm saying we can problem solve that and be creative about that maybe later, but right now for this vote, we're just voting on the competitive play.
Right, but Jim got to talk about immunizations.
No, your points are really good, Kathleen. They're really fantastic because no, they're great thoughts, but I just think for this particular vote, we need to be focused on just the competitive play. And then after that, you know, maybe expand it. Rhonda? Mathis?
Yes, I would agree. And I would be cautious about saying how many people could be on the team or not, because it doesn't come down to just trying to let people be on the team. When you're at the varsity level, it's about competition. It's about, skill set, ability. So if you say only, 20 people are going to be on the team, or 50 people are on the team, or 60 people are on the team, we can't just say that. It really depends on once they do the tryouts to figure out who has the ability for that. Again, varsity is really truly about competition. So I would be cautious with saying the numbers at this time, at least. But I can understand your concern and where you're coming from, Kathleen.
Okay, Rhonda, how many people were on the team last year? How's that?
Really?
It's a valid question. I'm asking.
Cross country.
It goes to equity. I agree. It goes to equity.
21 runners last year.
Rhonda, how many were on last year? I'm sorry.
There was 21 in total between the two teams, boys and girls, varsity.
Okay, we can make more than that, right? We can have 24. Or no, is it 12 boys and girls?
No, it's 12 boys and 12 girls, so you could have 24.
If they come out, we can pick more. That's great.
Yeah.
I think it's the modified that have so many more, to be honest
Yeah.
with you. I think it's the middle school modified sports that lock a lot of kids out. They go to cross country. And when you go to those, there's 50 kids.
Yeah, and it's a great sport for that, but I definitely support that we aren't there yet in terms of being able to manage those numbers under these circumstances.
No.
We can anyways. Okay, are people ready to take this vote? Make this
Yes.
vote? Okay, Karen, can you please do a roll call vote? This is for Dr. Calvin's recommendation, varsity only.
Kathleen Allen,
I will say yes, even though I was supporting modified, but I know that at least this is something because it doesn't look like there's numbers to go there. So I'm saying yes because of that.
Tom Chapa,
No.
Heather Del Conte,
Yes.
Pamela Dowd,
Yes.
Lisa Glidden,
Yes.
James McKenzie,
No.
Linda Serino.
No.
You have 4 yeses and 3 nos.
Okay, so that motion passed, so we can proceed to our personnel agenda, correct?
So are we allowed to make any other motions regarding this? Well, let me explain myself.
Yeah.
Let me explain myself. I understand everything that's been said, and I agree the kids matter, need to do things for the kids. Also, in this financial situation, if we had all of our home meets or matches or whatever it's going to be, if we out of all of our home things with no spectators, we would save probably tens of thousands of dollars. And I know from Mathis's chart before, when we had all of the sports were being considered at every level, I did some simple math, and if I was right, it was about $35,000. And so my guess is here, it could be about 20,000. It's dealing with the screeners, it's dealing with the one-way traffic. So, this is one of the great reasons I think we waited till this time to do it is people started talking, and one idea that came across my bow was, if for the kids, do it for the kids, but why are you spending all the extra money on the spectators? Why, it's an extra logistical problem. So for our home meets, I think that is something we should consider.
Jim, you're absolutely allowed to make a motion on that if you'd like to have that on the table, absolutely.
So, just if that's what we need to get a discussion on it, I'll make a motion for that this fall season with the 4 sports that we have just approved, that we prohibit spectators at our home matches.
And are you referring to both home and away spectators?
Yes, absolutely. It's bringing about a mass of people together in our stands under our supervision. I understand for somebody who I go to my kids' meets, right? I see them. I love watching them compete, but if we're really doing this just for the kids, the biggest health and safety thing, spectators is a whole thing that we can't mandate people do certain things. We have regulations that make us want to mandate them. We go back to you want everybody to wear a mask, but you can't make them do it. And I get that. But at the same time, it sets up our extra screeners and security people and custodians to clean and all of these things that aren't about the kids competing in and of itself. It's about us enjoying them, watching them compete. And I really think the focus needs to be wholly just on the kids.
Okay, Jim. Yes, thank you, Linda. We have a second. Is there any other discussion on this? Tom, did you want to say something?
No, I was just actually seconding it, but I agree with Jim. I just agree with Jim completely. It's like if we're going to, let's reduce the risk even more. If we're going to move ahead with it, let's try to do the best we can. Because I also go back to one more statement or one more thing is we're responsible not only for the finances and the education, but to the safety of the community as well. So the kids that come in here and compete with people from other areas and then go home to their, to their families and stuff. Those are things that I just like to consider. If we can mitigate that and with this kind of move, I support that greatly. So that's all.
Can I hear you loud and clear. I totally do. But I do believe one of the very beginning statements in the NISFA guidelines was that spectators are very important to the student athletes. And again, I go back to the viruses in the other communities also. They don't want to bring it here. They don't want to go home with it. So you got to expect that they're going to follow the protocols and expect us to follow them if we were visiting their outdoor stadiums.
So I actually did ask that question earlier, but I'm not sure if maybe I didn't phrase it exactly in the question. So maybe I'll do it now. Rhonda, can we control how other teams set up the cross-country course?
No, we cannot.
Right, so we have just authorized cross-country where we can set up our course in a way that is by the NISPA everything. And as you said, Pam, it's very possible that we can assume that they're all going to do what they're supposed to be doing. But the reality is we're going to send our kids into these circumstances, which we ourselves wouldn't be comfortable on our home course as a possibility, right? So I'm not sure we can always assume that other people are going to act in the same exact way that we would. With Baldwin Middle School going out remote now with more than 70 people in quarantine, it's not just about our kids, it's about who our kids have elementary siblings who are actually hybrid in our schools right now. And that maybe should have been something I said in the previous vote. I kind of regret that I didn't say it before. But, well, it's true because I look at a varsity player with a second grade sibling at one of our schools, and if the worst case scenario happens, that's your connection. And the cruddy thing about communicable diseases is that's the way it happens. So I'm just thinking too many people, less people better. It's about the kids.
I agree.
The Buffalo Bills can't have anybody. I'm one of the only Bills fans around in some areas. They can't have people.
They also serve alcohol there. That has a huge factor on it.
Can I, Ronnie, can we find out, can we table that part of this? I mean, because right now we're just moving ahead. If we table the spectator part of it, because competitions are going to happen right away, and then revisit that, see how other districts are handling that too. Maybe we say, one spectator per student. Stay in your cars. Like on Charles Street, if they're playing soccer, they can stay in their. My son had a baseball tournament. We were told you had to stay in your car. You could park around the field, and you had to stay in your car. So, there's ways around it of controlling it. I do understand what Jim's saying. So there's my.
Okay, so Kathleen has a motion to table it, Jim's motion for, and I think it does. It's a very important issue. It probably does merit more discussion and more thought. I think, Jim, you brought up a really good point. So is there a second for motion to table?
I'll second the motion to table.
Okay.
Later.
Is there any further discussion on tabling it? Okay, then all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, I think that's unanimous, Karen.
Okay, got it.
Thank you so much.
Is Mathis trying to speak or what? He's. You
don't
show
have to
everything.
interrupt. Mathis, can you speak?
I can speak. Okay, we're fine. We'll talk logistics later. We're good. Go ahead. We're good. May I add one thing when you're done with this vote before we move on to the rest of the agenda, if that's okay though?
Yeah, so this Jim's motion is going to be tabled for our next meeting, and we will vote on it then. So everyone think about it, get your information, ask your questions, so that we can come and have a meaningful discussion on that piece, and we'll vote on it at the next meeting. So that's it. And I just before I pass it over to you, Dr. Calvin, I unfortunately am running out of time, so I may have to step out at this point, but I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay. So, board, I just want to also, I'd like to make one more recommendation. So we are going to start with all of the practices on the 21st. I think it would be better for us to just get ourselves a couple days in. We'd like to start on the 23rd instead of the 21st. You know, today's Friday, so we still have people registering. Monday's pretty quick. Trying to get all that turned around with the coaches and everything is just going to be too fast. But if we can start the 23rd, that would be better. By the way, you know, that we wouldn't be disqualified from anything. There's already snow days and things built into those kinds of schedules for practices. So we need to take a couple more days. So I'd like to start on the 23rd if you're all okay. That's what I'd like for us to do. Any objection? Everybody okay? All right. Thank you.
Okay, next, if we can, with the decision of the board to move to Dr. Calvin's recommendation for option 2, I'm asking that the board to amend the agenda to remove item A, extra comp recommendations for high school, Oswego Middle School JV, varsity, and modified. Can I get a motion?
Move it.
I second it. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Dr. Sweeney?
Okay, so we have one extra compensatory recommendation for varsity coaches. As presented, we do not have a recommendation yet for the varsity boys soccer head coach. That post went out shortly after our last decision about sports moving forward in some way as anticipated, so we don't have a recommendation for that. And then we have a second personnel item. It's a batch of our substitute and temporary employees.
Could I have a motion, please?
Move it.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Then we'll move to finance with Nancy Squires.
And there's one thing on the agenda, and that is to appoint Ferrara Fiorenza as special legal counsel to the district as presented.
Motion?
Move it.
Second?
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any items from the student representative today?
No.
Items from the board?
I do. Mathis, in your presentation, you said, that we would talk about the other activities other than sports, like marching band and that kind of thing. When will we have the opportunity to do that? Because I was looking at like marching band, and there are districts that are doing it, non-competitive, of course, but they are, Baldwinsville practicing, our local county schools too. So I'm just wondering when we're going to have that conversation, and is there an interest from those folks to do that? I mean, I would think that there would be. I've heard from a couple parents about it, but yeah.
Right, so I remain open to any conversation, any discussion. I would say, if we can discuss it, we can certainly do that at the next board meeting if that's what the board wishes to do. I will be honest with you up front that, we're trying to reopen the schools, and I'm concerned that we may take on too much. That may be a little bit difficult for us to be able to manage. I am aware that there are a couple schools, you're correct, Kathleen, who are doing the marching band piece. I've heard about that. There are many who are not. There are some concerns about the spacing, 12 feet apart, and just, it's an instrument, right? So I'm not going to say that we would take it off the table. I would certainly be more than willing to have a conversation. If you wish to do that at the next meeting, we could do that, or the meeting thereafter, whichever the board wishes to do, we can talk that through. But again, my concern is that, just up front, being honest, there's only so many things that we can do and do very well, and I'm just worried that we may take on way too much for ourselves. I just want to share that. I know that there's a lot of groups that want a lot of things. When the sports came up, a lot of people have shared with me, I want this, I want that, and I understand. But we want to be careful, and we want to be safe, and right now the priority is to get the buildings open. So I remain very open to having the conversation. I hope that answered your question, Kathleen. I hope I did.
It did. It did. I just, that's a different group of kids. It's a different cohort of kids with different interests. And that's my concern, that you're talking about equity, and, those kids that are doing that are not the kids that we're going to reach through cross-country or soccer. So I just want to make sure that we're allowing opportunity for all.
So I have a question also, Mathis, actually on academic equity. We got a robocall from the principal of our school about handing out materials the other day, and she mentioned in it that there's a wait list for the Chromebooks.
Sure.
And I'm sorry for springing this on you without giving you time to look this up, but is it a long wait list, or do we have an idea of when when those are coming in?
Absolutely. So what we have learned over the last week, and board, I believe it's in your Friday message for the week, what we have learned is that we had a high number of students who have registered, who came to us not knowing what the expectation was for the year, or we have folks who did not sign up for materials, basically. And so we have around 200 kids that we found out did not have a Chromebook this week. So what I did was I figured, hey, we got to figure out a way to reduce this or get this barrier overcome. And so what I did was I began to reach out to my colleagues, right? Because there's a holdup waiting to get some of these Chromebooks in. So I began to reach out to my colleagues at BOCES and also at other districts. And I'm very glad to report that a number of them have reached back out to us and said, hey, listen, we've got some materials that we'll loan you. So we've got several neighboring districts, Hannibal, our BOCES, Phoenix, who reached out to us. And we have several other calls that have been out, and folks have said, I'd like to talk to you after your board meeting is done today. So we were able to overcome the barrier by being able to reach out and grab some that way. We've also learned, by the way, today that we may be able to get a couple of Chromebooks faster. There are some refurbished things that we may be able to get that's out there. So we're working on securing those as well from out in the field, basically. But so yes, I was made aware of the issue. We already started to work on the issue, and we had some that were picked up already from BOCES, some that were picked up from Hannibal, if I remember correctly today, and we have more that we're in the process of picking up right now. So by next week, our goal is to make sure we get those out to families as quick as we can, basically. I hope that answers your question.
That does. Thank you so much. That's really great to hear.
Yes.
At this time, could I have a motion for adjournment?
No one wants to leave.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Guys.
And Kathleen, were you second?
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You may adjourn.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Good night, everybody.